There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. All right, want to talk today about being busy. You know that, staying on the mood, go, 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 advancing, taking on more and more, adding more on your plate, trying to solve everybody's problems in some ways all the time. And while on the one hand, that drive to achieve is a really powerful thing that lets us hit goals and targets and move forward, but at the same time, that drive can turn to a negative side, to become toxic. So what we want to talk about is where's the line between a positive drive to achieve and toxicity that becomes counterproductive. We're going to try to understand why, what's driving those needs to do more, do more, do more, and we're also going to talk about what you can do about it. My guest today is Israa Nasir. She's a psychotherapist, keynote speaker, and the author of the book we're talking about, Toxic Productivity. Reclaim your time and energy in a world that always demands more. She's the founder of a digital media platform that's @well.guide and has over 350,000 subscribers and counting, I might add. She looks at evidence-based approaches to emotional well-being, burnout, and achievement culture. Lots of global speaking, lots of global clients like Google, Microsoft, Meta, Bloomberg, also talks at Yale and other places. Her work has been in Times, Forbes, Harvard Business Review, just to start the list. So Israa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me and for the lovely introduction.
It's great. It's great to be with you. And it's an impressive track record of what you've created. Okay, for listeners out there, I'm going to do something a little different. You know, I always start with why do people write the book? I've gotten tired of that question, so I'm going to shift that question. What I want to know is tell me a story. Tell me a story about you and the journey on this book. Anything you want to share with us about you.
Yeah, so the story actually is partially responding to the question of why the book happened, but it is like a moment in my life. This is about a couple of years ago, like I want to say like 7, 8 years ago. I had just moved to New York City. I was recently married. I had just gotten a very cool job at a startup. And, I had just turned 30 and all of the check boxes had been marked off for me. And so it just felt like the most like peak of being young. You've worked hard in your 20s, you've gotten everything in, you've gotten the things. And so I was just kind of on this like roller coaster of doing things, saying yes to things, going out. I think my husband and I were going out 7 nights a week at one point. And like it felt like everybody I met in this new glamorous city would say things like, wow, like, your job sounds so cool. Like your life seems so cool. Like you're doing so many fun things, la, la, la. But there was a point halfway through where that started to feel like a lie. And the biggest shift that happened for me in that this moment is that I started feeling that the way people saw my life was not what my life was. And so it kind of made me feel like a fraud. I felt very like uncomfortable. I was like, I just felt very lost and disconnected. And I didn't understand why, because I felt like I had done everything. I was doing all the things, but there was this disconnect. People were seeing me as happier than I was. And that's really scary. You're like, oh, wow, like, why am I not happy? Like, if I've done all the things, like, is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with my life? Like, did I make the wrong decisions? It becomes so existential. So, like, my 31st year of life was just this, like, absurd existential, like, journey where I was just like reading all these like philosophy books and stuff. And then started more like research oriented stuff to start to understand why I was feeling that disconnect. And my learnings actually brought me to a very interesting moment or insight, which was, I would go to bookstores a lot to just browse the shelves, and that's how I would pick up a lot of interesting books. But when I shifted away from like the philosophy to the psychology piece to understand what was going on with me, I noticed that the books on the self-help section or the personal development section, they're very behavior oriented. Now, I'm a therapist too, so like I could see the foundation of those books. They were all about habit change, behavior change, systems, right? Like if you just change these things in your life, like you will be happier, you will be better, you will be all these things. But I knew that, I mean, A, I had done those changes. B, even with my own clients, I knew that this didn't work. And there was this big gap in the literature about emotions. Like emotions are like it's seen as like a dirty word, especially in the workplace. Like you don't want to be too emotional, like you don't want to have emotions, it's a weakness. But emotions are like the main undercurrent driver of your output, of your productivity, of the health of your relationships, just everything. But that was just missing. And I knew that I was struggling with some emotions that was showing up in like poor habits, especially like not saying no, going out all the time, over committing to things. So that's really kind of like that was like this 1.5 year point of my life where I was doing a lot of like personal research, which led me to my hypothesis of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, it can easily feel like all those self-help things become one more item in the to-do list. And I think you write about it that way in some ways in the book. So let me just be clear about this. You've just moved to a city I love, New York City. You've got the apartment, everything's great. You're married. I presume you're still married and happily married and all, that was good, like it should have been good. You have a job, you can pay the bills, you've got enough money to go to the restaurants or the plays or whatever you want. So externally, it looks great. It's just internally, you're not feeling that happy.
Yeah. And, even when you list it out like that, it sounds so like, you should feel happy. But I think that, you could do all the external things, but if those things are not necessarily fully value aligned, or that there's a gap in your life where you're not doing things that are reflective of your values or purpose, or like things that genuinely fuel you in a direction, it just doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like I guess like the word is good enough, but like it just doesn't feel right. Yeah.
Right. Right. To me, that seems incredibly normal. So I don't think there's anything strange about that, because I think if there isn't something that is adding meaning, you do be doing 101 things, but it isn't fulfilling because it isn't adding a sense of meaning or a sense of connection or a sense of any number of other things. And you're right to say emotionally, there's some disconnect. It's like you're doing check, 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 but not really experiencing the moments.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I joke that I had like a midlife crisis in my 30s, but the truth is like the quintessential midlife crisis, if you will, is also like a desire to seek authentic values. Like, the way we show it in media, it's like you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna like divorce my partner and get a car and like whatever. Like you see this like very hyperbolic like version of it. But the truth of it is like even in working with clients who are like a little older and they're like what you could say is like more appropriate for a midlife crisis than a person who just turned 30. It's really that same desire. It's the desire for more meaning, for making sure that the time you have on earth is like given to people and things that you actually care about. And then there's like a purpose to it.
Right, right. Makes sense. I don't think there's any secret on when the midlife crisis happens. I think it happens multiple times in lives when you stop and say, is this what I want? Is this what I expected? I remember somebody in their mid-30s saying to me, like I have everything that you would expect, and you sort of want to sit back and say, is this all? and have that question, is this all? All right. One of the things that I like about the book, apart from this understanding of what gets all of us to a point of saying we're not fulfilled, is this notion of toxic productivity. So what do you mean by that, and what does it actually look like?
Yeah, so toxic productivity is like a frame of mind. it's a framework within which we see the world and our life. And within that framework, there is a very strong connection between how good you feel about yourself, so your self-worth, and your external achievements. So how good you feel about yourself becomes very dependent on what you can produce as an achievement for other people to see and applaud. There's an absence of internal validation, right? In the framework as well, there is a desire to kind of pursue achievement because it's seen as a vehicle for acceptance and belonging. So somewhere along the way, it usually starts pretty early, but somewhere along the way, you learned the connection that, hey, if I'm good, like if I'm the good student, parents are going to give me a little bit more attention, right? If I do really well in school, like I get a lot of applause at the school assembly. So we started building this connection that we can barter achievement for acceptance and belonging. And that's what kind of like stays within the toxic productivity framework. And the final one is that it's all coming at the expense of your foundational wellness. Now, there's nothing wrong in chasing success and achievement and wanting people to appreciate the work you do. But when it's coming at the expense of skipping food and not eating properly and not sleeping well, not having time to go move your body, ghosting or flaking on your friends, so there's no social health, right? So these three things happen, and then you are now caught in this like spiral. And it's kind of like a very self-feeding spiral. The more you do, the more overcommitted you are, the less the quality of your work becomes. Whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in your personal life as a romantic partner, a friend, a parent, the quality declines if you overcommit. And because the quality declines, you get stressed that you're not good enough. So you say yes more, you do more, right? It just becomes this like, I originally had called the book The Productivity Paradox because it is a paradox. The more productive you want to be, the less productive you are because of the unresolved emotions. And so, I think about that a lot. It's like, how can we break the cycle, the loop?
Yeah. 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 So I see this so many times with people who feel that they have to do more, do more, do more, do more. They add more on their teams. They add more on themselves. They add more goals. They add more targets. They put a heavier timeline on it, all seeking some sort of external gratification, which can be reward or bonus or recognition or feeling that they're somehow one of the top performers of the company and they just keep go, 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 go. Or perfectionism, as you say, kind of can drive that. Any number of things. And you just keep doing more and more and more and more in hopes that it fills the gap you're feeling in some ways. All right, why? Why do you think we get ourselves in a state of all this toxicity?
Well, I think there's like multiple reasons for it, and it can vary depending on the person. But foundationally, we are living in a world right now that the rule is that the more productive you are, the more valued you are. Like that's just a blanket rule that we are all abiding by, right? And whether it's your hobbies, like people have monetized their hobbies and they're putting this toxic productivity framework to their hobbies, to their parenting, to their friendships, to work, right? To their personal health, to self-care. And so we live in a culture that is glamorizing this. So it's hard to see it as being negative. So that's the first thing. The second thing, the reason this happens is it is also the inherited family culture. So if your foundation is from a family that values achievement, that used achievement as acceptance, if it was your way out of like a difficult situation, it's a survival strategy, or maybe you're an immigrant. And so like if there's a foundation of it, it becomes even more amplified in our culture. And we collectively, and I'm seeing a little bit of a shift in the last year and a half, where there's more conversation around redefining ambition and like redefining purpose and leaning into more communal, slow activities. Like I'm seeing this trend come up. But over the last 15 years, it's really just been sleep when you're dead, hustle and grind. Mark Zuckerberg dropped out and became a billionaire with his tech company. We can do this too, right? Like sleep in the office, like you go to any tech company and they've got showers and like a dentist who comes in so you don't have to leave the office. And so I think it's just our culture. It really values it.
It's true. I see lots of people who have achieved really, really well, like in school, for example, and they carry that drive to be at the top of the class with them all the way through into work. And that is good in the early years because you get rewarded for that. But there's a point at which you need to change that behavior if you're really going to step up to the next level of performance. And that is a hard change, in my experience, a really hard change for people to recognize, because you're right. The culture says do more, do more, do more, do more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the reason I'm not getting ahead is I'm not doing enough. Okay.
Yeah. And like, there's also like, I mean, A, it's hard to recognize. B, it's even harder to unlearn, right? Like once we recognize it, we have to figure out a way to like unlearn it. And then the third step is to relearn a healthier way of connecting to your productivity, to your sense of self and achievement and all of that. And you're right, like the higher up you go, if you don't have a really crystal clear connection to your values, it impacts the kind of decision maker you are in a team. If you're someone who doesn't regulate their emotions well and you're driven by fear, impulse, right, shame, which I explore in the book, it reflects in your leadership. It reflects in the way your team culture is. It reflects in the way people see you. And it's so important to kind of think about this, not as like just like a personal growth thing that maybe, this is a very important skill in the workplace as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. Because the higher you go, the more people underneath you. If you are having that drive, the more you're imposing that drive on other people in a toxic way. All right. So let's talk about, how do you tell the difference between whether this drive to do and to achieve is healthy and where it becomes toxic? Like, what's the boundary line in there? How do we tell the difference?
Some hallmarks of healthy productivity are, the first one is the concept or like the actual implementation of rest is baked into the plan. So whatever plan you have for yourself to achieve like XYZ thing, breaks, rest are kind of built into it. It's like a default state. You're not using rest as a reward. Rest is a requirement of your productivity. Like you understand that and you're able to tap into it. That's the first thing. The second is that it is value aligned with the purpose that you are pursuing, right? I understand things happen in life. You're given a project that is not necessarily value aligned. That's okay. But the broader purpose that we are pursuing in life must be value aligned for it to nourish us, for us to find it meaningful. If it's not aligned, we are going to have a really hard time finding meaning in that. And then we burn out, we become disconnected, all those things. So that's another hallmark of healthy productivity, is that it's value aligned. And the last one, I think, is that when we are pursuing, we are able to pivot and adjust. When people are in toxic productivity, they are so outcome oriented that sometimes they cannot see the value of pivoting or adjusting or changing or streamlining, removing things, right? There's not a lot of flexibility in toxic productivity. And healthy productivity is not so outcome aligned. It's also like process oriented, like process aligned. So it shifts and it changes and it adjusts as new information comes up in your life. And that, I think, is sometimes the single biggest point of distress in people's lives, and often the point at which they come to therapy, is when they are not able to incorporate changing circumstances and adjust the outcome that they were pursuing. That causes so much distress. People resist it. People push against like an immovable fact of life, and it creates a lot of mental friction. And that's a really hard thing to do. Like, I fully understand that myself, but it is like really important to consider.
Yeah. So circumstances change, situation is different, nothing you are going to do to change that situation. And now your ability to align your process, your approach, pivot, shift, adjust, and move forward in a healthy way. If you can't do that, then there's a massive sign of toxic productivity. Okay? If you don't know what your values are and the majority of work you're doing doesn't sort of address your values in some way, then you're at risk or in the middle of toxic productivity. And if you feel like rest is for the weak or not a requirement to be at your best, or you're willing to sub-optimize your rest on a regular basis, then that's probably in the toxic side. Is that a fair summary?
That's a really great summary.
All right, fair enough. All right, then let's shift to what do we do? So what's the antidote? And I want to say at the outset, I know you have a different take. You're not going to give me a 7-check behavior list because you don't think that's the answer. So what is the answer?
When we only sit in self-awareness, we actually don't heal or grow. And when we only sit in behavior change, we don't heal and grow. So those two things have to happen together. You need to have self-awareness and you need to be able to integrate that awareness into your habits. And that's how we make changes. And so some of the things that I suggest are more self-awareness oriented. Some are more habit change oriented. But you kind of have to meet yourself where you're at and adjust this to your own life, right? So the first thing is, when I talk to people about toxic productivity, let's say I have a client or somebody, and I'm like, do you rest? Do you sleep? Whatever, I ask those questions. They're like, I don't have time. I don't have time for a hobby. I don't have time for this. I don't have time for lunch. Of course, I'm just gonna grab a protein bar on my way to pick up my kids, right? People are busy. That's the biggest piece of self-awareness I want to bring to people, is that you cannot change something you don't even know. So getting in the habit of regularly auditing your time and energy, either at a biweekly, basis, a weekly basis, or monthly, but definitely regularly looking your calendar, your commitments, your obligations, what you've said yes to, making sure you have a really good idea of that, but not just to know, but to reflect on. Like at the end of the week, if you look back at your last 2 weeks, for anybody who's listening, right? Look back at your last 2 weeks at your calendar and ask yourself, did I have to do this? Did I feel good before doing it, going into it? Did I feel good after doing it? Right? Sometimes we feel bad before doing something, but after we're like, wow, that was so good. Like working out for me, for example, right? Sometimes you're like, oh God, I agreed to this thing, and you're feeling bad. Then you go and you do it and you leave feeling even worse. That's a big indication of a value misalignment. So doing a time energy audit regularly is one thing people can do to start shifting away from toxic productivity into healthy productivity. There's no one singular habit that's going to make the shift. It's really about making small shifts in your mindset and your habits that will move you towards a healthier place. Audit is super important, super helpful. The second thing I always recommend is, once you've done these audits and you've become a little comfortable in recognizing, reflecting, becoming aware of which obligations make you feel what kind of way, I practice something called undercommitting. So we do this overcommitting by default. Yeah, I'll do this. Yeah, I can help you. Yeah, I have 20 minutes between 2 meetings. I can do this thing, right? So undercommitting is essentially intentionally giving yourself a limit to how much you can take or how much you can do. What we do is we see that we have 5 hours a week that are free. So we try to fill them up with 6 hours worth of stuff, right? Just in case something falls short, we can squeeze things in, we double book ourselves. What you want to do is, I have 5 hours free time this week, let's say. I can only say no at max to 4 hours of things. So you're intentionally undercommitting as a future habit. That's really hard. This one is the hardest for me, because I'll see a 20-minute block in my calendar that's free. And I'm like, I could do something in there. Let me research whatever, podcasts, right? So you want to flip that habit, and you want to intentionally undercommit. And you don't have to undercommit an hour a week. It could be 20 minutes a week. It could be one weekend morning block, right? It doesn't have to be very big. The third thing I think people can do is, if you've gotten into this place where you're undercommitting a little bit, you're regularly looking at your calendar, is to tap into a creative hobby. And that's the one I get the most resistance on, because people are just no way. I don't have time for this. This is ludicrous. And then I invite them to open their phones and go into their app usage time. And then they will see, and I will see that they are spending 3, 4, 5 hours on their phone, sometimes a day, sometimes a week. So there is time. It's just being like there's a leak. Your time is leaking, your energy is leaking out because you're not aware of it. So tapping into a creative hobby, if we can make space for it, even if it's something you do once every 2 weeks, allows your mind to restore its cognitive capabilities. Toxic productivity erodes your cognitive capabilities. So you're on autopilot. And I discuss this in detail in the book, like what is autopilot? How is it different from depression and all that stuff? But because you're so decision fatigued, because you're doing so much and you're so committed, that you're so overcommitted, you're just saying yes to things because you don't want to think about it. You're just like skipping meals because you don't want to think about it. You're just kind of like operating on fumes. A creative hobby allows you to disconnect from that, like autopilot state, and reconnect with yourself. So it doesn't have to be something that requires a lot of money. You don't even have to leave your house for it. Like you don't have to join like an expensive run club or whatever. It can be something as simple as picking up puzzles or like like a needle point. I did that last year. I just learned it on YouTube for fun. And I got like mediocrely bad at it. And I was like, that's where I'm staying. I'm not trying to get better. Right. So I think like a creative hobby, even if it's reading fiction, not nonfiction, is really, really helpful in healing toxic productivity.
Right. So music, dance, drawing, arts, sewing, crafts of any kind, cooking for some people, not always for everybody. Is that a creative hobby? Any variations on that, standing out in nature and just marveling, collecting something from nature and coming back, creating a collage. There's 1,000 ways of doing this, again, that are going to give you a release in your mental space. All right, I want to dig. So 3 things you said. I love this notion of auditing. Where is your time and energy really going? So I think most of us don't quite recognize how much time gets lost in the course of the day and where we're really spending our time. But I love the addition of what's the energy requirement to do this? Is it fulfilling, not fulfilling? Is it draining? What's the energy? And I add to that, what's the impact? Because you feel a whole lot better if you feel like it's having a big impact. So all 3 of those. And then to intentionally undercommit, don't fill every moment of every day, pick up a creative habit and reflect. All right. Now in the book, you also talk about some underpinnings, some psychological underpinnings that I want you to talk about for just a minute, because I think these are so powerful for people. You talk about 3 big sources, the sense of shame, a sense of perfectionism, and comparing yourself to others. Talk about how those are and why they fuel this toxic productivity.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very big question, because and it's a good one, right? It's a good one because these 3 things are so hidden. They mask themselves so well that we actually don't even recognize when we are operating out of shame, when we are operating out of comparison. And so I think like a couple of things I can say about that. I guess like, would you want me to kind of like foundationally talk about the relationship between them, or what is the angle you want me to take?
Maybe the easiest is to pick one, like perfectionism, which is the one I see having so much impact on people's toxic productivity and on the teams that they're leading. And that's a little bit easier. The comparison and the shame gets a much deeper psychological story, and it's harder to recognize.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay. So perfectionism, for example, is something that is like hugely valued in our world. People like call themselves type A personalities, like they put it in their like dating bios, and it's really seen as something that is a positive. And that's because it gives you a lot of positive results, right? Your workplace, you're seen as someone who's reliable. So there's a lot of benefit to it. However, I've actually never met a true perfectionist who is very settled, grounded, and happy on the inside. It is the largest disconnect between external and internal. I might say to somebody, wow, you're so punctual. Like you're always on time. Like if you're on time, that means, like I have a friend like this. Like if she's on time, it means she was late. Like she's so punctual. But internally, her anxiety is so powerful about how other people might see her and how it might tarnish her reputation, and how, this perception management of perfectionism is so powerful that she's always so stressed that she needs to be somewhere before 10 minutes before her time. So while the outcome is really good, the experience is really negative for her in her mental health. And it's something she's working on changing by intentionally being late, which is funny because you don't really think about things like that. But it is true. So there's three types of perfectionism that can show up for us, and they all kind of tie into toxic productivity. One is self-directed. So this is the one where you put up a lot of demands on yourself for perfection. And here you don't tolerate mistakes. You might not even try something new because you're so afraid that it's not going to be perfect. So you stay kind of in your comfort zone, and you keep doing more and more and more in your comfort zone, but you don't get out of it. And the second kind of perfectionism is other oriented. Now, this is where you demand it from other people. Parents can fall into this. If you grew up with very highly critical parents who didn't have a lot of flexibility for mistakes, you were on the receiving end of somebody else's other directed perfectionism. And the third is, it's essentially like the perception management perfectionism, where you want other people's to see you as perfect. Like, you want your reputation to be somebody who doesn't make mistakes, who's always organized. And while that might not be true on the inside, you will move mountains to make sure that that's what it appears like. And this is where you kind of see the keeping up with the Joneses type of mindset of, like, the Stepford era of, like, everything is perfect. We're just going to smile through our pain so as other people believe that we are perfect. So all these three things tie into toxic productivity in the demand it puts on you. If you believe a certain definition of what it means to be a good worker, for example, a good employee, you're going to demand that out of yourself to the perfect level. And you're going to push yourself so much until you're going to burn out, or your body gives up and you become sick, right? You see this a lot with new parents. They have this idea of what a new parent should be like, and they just are so consumed with the perfectionist aspect of it that they stop being present parents. They just become perfect in their own definitions of it. It also kind of is interesting and paradoxical sometimes that perfectionism leads to something called analysis paralysis, which is the inability to make a decision because you're so scared the decision you're going to make is not perfect. Now, how does this show up in, like, day-to-day life? Let's say you are responsible for a report at work. You have to send out an email to the client. You are so concerned with the level of perfect this email needs to be that you read over it not for 20 minutes, but for 2 hours. That's 2 hours of productivity gone down the drain because you are reading the same email over and over again, removing an exclamation point, shifting the paragraphs, changing a word, looking at the order of the two, the send list to see, people can get like this, and people can get completely stuck. And what ends up happening is procrastination. What ends up happening is poor quality of work. What ends up happening is missing deadlines, actually. Because you got so consumed with this one email, your actual deliverable that you had to send didn't get sent that day. Didn't happen. And so that's perfectionism in the background. But, we don't really think about it like that. And so this really pushes you to continue to overcommit and take on more and do more and not have boundaries. Yeah, perfectionists sometimes struggle with boundaries.
Yeah, I have a number of clients, historically and current, who are perfectionists. And what it means is they demand perfection of their teams. Now, on the one hand, their teams need to learn and grow and step up. And yes, that's true. But there's no tolerance in there for any sort of mistake. And it's kind of just this unrelenting pressure that they put on other people in the guise of, I'm helping you develop to be a stronger professional. But it's in the guise of, it doesn't see the toxicity that gets added on top of it. And it's, frequently for these people, it's something about their background, their childhood, their need to have fought so hard to get where they are that, any crack in that just would mean that the world is going to come down to, crashing. So it's an interesting cycle that I see over and over again that not only hurts your productivity, but it's deadly on a team, particularly a younger team.
Yeah. And I just want to make one point to something you said right now. There are certain people who are held to different standards. So we hear about the model minority myth that Asian American immigrants kind of have thrust upon them. So there is this like demand of perfection from Asian employees, right? There is this like misguided myth that women are more perfectionist than men. So a lot of men who struggle with perfectionism kind of fly under the radar, and maybe their habits are rewarded in the workplace because of gender, discrimination. And the woman who is exhibiting perfectionist tendencies is kind of looked down upon. So there is a truth to why sometimes some people might feel a certain way in a team. And I think the structural systems at play, they are what they are, right? And we can only do so much to shift it at that level, but we can make changes in our teams that can really enable people to perform at their best. And I think the thing I would say to anybody who does feel like there is I guess kind of like, what would you call it? A stereotyped perfectionism that is being thrust upon them. It always really helps to have like identity aligned and identity misaligned mentors in the workplace. So I think the common experience is to, find your identity alignment. Like, so you see like new parents, employee resource groups, and you see like people of color employees, you see that, and that's really helpful. And it's also equally as important to have allies who are identity misaligned so that there's diversity in the support you get in the workplace.
Right. And differences in perspective and so on. And people are going to speak up for you in different ways. Okay, Israa, this is a fascinating conversation. I love the notion that it's time to talk about productivity not as just more is always better, but more is more for what? How does it align with the values? How does it align with what I really want to achieve? How does it align with the impact I really want to be having? And that we use that as a way of saying, how do I make sure that where I'm putting my time, my effort, my attention is actually on the things that I want my life to have stood for at the end of the day? Now, granted, we all do things we don't love. I get that. But we don't want to do them 99% of the time for some external goal that isn't really satisfying our internal need. So I just think it's an important distinction. And I love the distinction because, just to quietly quit means I kind of give up. That doesn't seem taking responsibility, accountability for yourself. Neither does just doing. Neither does, pushing back on everything and saying no to everything. So I really like this notion of recognizing what is toxic for you. And then what are you going to do to recognize both its source and then to take action on it? So fabulous book. Again, my guest today is Israa Nasir. The book is Toxic Productivity: Reclaim Your Time and Energy in a World That Always Demands More. Israa, if people wanted to find you, where should they reach out to you?
The best place is my website, israanasir.com. That's ISRAANASIR.com. And the second best place is my Instagram account. I'm very active there as well. And that is well.guide on Instagram.
Well.guide. Okay, I love it. Thanks for joining us. What a fabulous conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. And join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone. You can also watch this conversation, if you'd like, on YouTube at Out of the Comfort Pod. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.